the screen over so that I can see. Sure. Yuki, can you see my VS Code? Do you see my code?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yes, we can see.
Excellent. All right. Okay, so async JavaScript. Is it fun? So maybe let me start by doing a quick survey. If you find this async JavaScript concept is hard to understand, can you raise your hand? You can virtually raise your hand by clicking the icon. I just want to get a feel. If you think it is easy or hard. If it is hard, can you raise your hand? Also, everyone thinks it's, oh, okay. Okay. So Hannah and content, do you think it is easy, or do you have do you find that tricky? Hey, Hannah, what do you think?
I think I used to see it, so it's not really tricky yet.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I personally think async JavaScript is one of the most tricky concepts in JavaScript programming. At least that's what I think. It took me quite a bit of time to get a really good understanding. Initially, I thought I got a good understanding, but then it was tricky. But it is so important, especially when you're doing real-world application programming. Oftentimes, you have to call some API to get some result, and it will take some time. Some of them can take up to seconds, right? So it is very important to not only to understand how to use that concept, but also how to use that wisely. So this is one of the lessons that I'm not going to talk about anything that is outside of the scope of the Udemy. There are things that he didn't cover, but I'm not going to go through that because I want to make sure we get the basic understanding, a solid basic understanding first, right? So the easiest, I guess the most interesting way to show this concept here is to let's write an application together, right? So let's pretend we are going to show some information about a movie. So I have a simple HTML here with a movie name field to be populated by our code, right? So initially, it has a movie name here and an empty span with an ID name, right? And similarly, directed by, screenplay by, we have different fields. So 3 fields in here. So, and I'm going to do something here. So let me first search. Okay. It's more fun to have some actual information possible. Movie. Fantastic view. Right. Okay. So let's pretend we want to populate something like this, right? We are going to show all the fields there's needed, but I will just pick the name of the movie and then directed by and screenplay by. Okay. So to do that, first of all, in the real world, this information can be stored in some database, and then we can make some call to get the information and show it on the screen, right? I think in the next lesson we are going to talk about API and things like that. But for now, first start by pretending we have. Okay, let this over. Okay. Okay, so let's create two functions to begin with, right? Two functions to pretend to be backend API, right? So the first one, get movie name or get movie, is a function that pretends to go to a server to fetch the name of the movie and return it, similar to what we saw in Udemy, right? Okay, so get movie. So let's use the ES6 syntax here, arrow function, right? So in the, remember, we creation of promises, right? So in the real world, when you fire a call against some backend, some API, it will take some time and then will return, right? So we can simulate that by creating a function that will return a promise, meaning it will not give you the result right away. There is a delay, right, before you can get the actual information. And remember the syntax here, if you are to create a promise, is new promise. And then inside a callback, which will have resolve and reject, right? Like this. So we are going to return this new promise. Okay, so just the framework here. So this getMovie function will return a new promise, which can either be resolved or rejected based on certain condition. To simulate an API, we use the set timeout, as we have seen in Udemy. So set timeout will take two arguments. The first one is a callback function that will get executed after the delay. Second argument is the delay. So let's make it 2 seconds. So this is in milliseconds. So 2000 means 2 seconds. Okay, in the function body here, we can just say resolve, right? And then with the name, let me just copy paste the name. Okay, but then remember API can fail, right? So let's simulate the possibility of a failing API. So let's say we have a Boolean variable movie, okay, which can be true or false. So if it is true, that means we want to return a successful response. If you set it to false, we want to fail the request, right? So we can here we can get a condition block here. If movie okay, we resolve. So we are resolving the promise here, right? Else reject. And when we reject, we can reject with a string, or we can throw an error. So usually we will use error. So you can just say error. You can throw that as a string. That's okay too. But it is better, as a good practice, we usually use the error type. So meaning we will create a new error. Inside the error, you can have a text description. Name, right? So, okay, so let's see if it works. So here I'm running this. And then if I get movie, it returns a promise as expected, because this is returning a promise. And the promise is fulfilled, so it is resolved, right? Fulfilled or resolved. And the result is the name here, right? But if I set it to false, and I get movie, oh, it takes some time because it takes 2 seconds, right? It takes 2 seconds. Okay, after 2 seconds, it failed. and the error is failed getting name. Okay, so maybe just a quick recap of this function here. So this getMovie will return a promise, right? It return a new promise. And when we create a promise, we pass a callback. So this first block here is a callback function. Sorry, actually here, this is the callback function with a delay of 2 seconds in this case. And then in this, in the callback, you can call, resolve, or reject, right? So in our case, we would based off of the movie OK boolean, we will either resolve it or reject it. Right, so far so good. And right, okay, let's make one more function to return the other details like the character and the screenplay field. So let's put this thing here, details. Okay, so basically just copy paste, very similar. Details. Okay. So this time, let's make it more interesting. Instead of returning or resolve the promise with anything, right? You can resolve it with a string, an object, or anything else. So the object would contain 2 fields, directed by, screenplay, copy paste the name. All right, so I use an object here because this is not just one information, right? There are 2 fields. So what I'm trying to do is to mimic 2 API calls, right? The first one would return just the name of the movie. Second one would return a bunch of other details, just the 2 fields for now, but you can imagine easily have like 100 fields here, right? But otherwise, if it fails, object. So let's try that out. Details. Okay. Right. So as you can see, it fulfilled, and the result is an object with 2 fields, right? Let's just make sure it works okay. Let's test the failure scenario. After 2 seconds, after 2 seconds it failed, and it rejects the promise with this error. All right, so 2 functions so far. Any questions so far before we move on? This is creation of promises. We are going to use these 2 functions to play with the promises, right, to consume them. So this is not the most important thing, but it is still important to understand how you can create a promise, because sometimes you do need to create promises to do something, even though in today's for now this is mainly for to simulate API calls, but in actual application you do sometimes need to create promises to do something. So it is important to understand how to create promises, right? And you do not always need to use the set timeout. This is just one easy way to mimic asynchronous operations, right? But you can have other logic here that would take time. So the key point is that this is something that will take a long time or longer, that you do not want to, you want to use promise to handle that kind of scenarios. All right, so that is the 2 functions. Okay, so let's say, okay, let me now open the file. Let me open. Okay, so there are three. Remember, we have three fields, right? So I'm going to use this function to call this function to get the name, and then I will populate this field with the name, right? And similarly, this get details will return the two fields here that would be populated in here. So let's try to do that. And there are different ways to handle promises, right? For example, you can do that in series or in parallel. So meaning you can, if needed, you can have some code that will first get the movie and wait until we get the result before you even try to get details. Or if you want, you can make them in parallel, meaning you can call get movie and get details at the same time. So here I intentionally make the delay to be the same. They're both 2 seconds to make it easier to visualize serial versus parallel execution. So if I have one after another, then what we will expect is that we'll wait for 2 seconds and then we see the name, and then we call the get details, we wait for another 2 seconds before we see the other two fields, right? But then if they're in parallel, in this case, since they are both of them are exactly 2 seconds, we will see everything pop up in the screen at the same time. So let's first start by doing serial execution. So let's say we create another function called populate. Here is one, two. This function will populate the fields, right, by calling and getting the information from the two functions. Arrow function. And what we can do is, first of all, we call get movie, right? So remember, this will return a promise, right? So there are different ways to consume this promise. One way is to use the .then, right? The .then. So the reason why we can do that is because the get movie, the call to get movie, will return a promise. The promise object comes with a .then, a then function. That's why you can call this function. So this is a function from the promise, right? And this function will be called with a callback that will have the result of the promise. So which is the name in this case, right? So again, this call will return a promise, and since it is a promise, we can execute the then function. And when we call the then function, you can pass a callback function as an argument. And when this promise resolves, it will the returned value, which is the string in this case, will be passed to the argument of the callback, right? So you may find that confusing initially, but this is just like things that when you do more, you become like natural. But let's confirm this is working. Move on. So if I just console log the name, then if I call populate, we will expect after 2 seconds we will see the name show up on the in the console here. Yeah, so it works, right? So we call this, it returns a function. It returns a promise. So the promise will be resolved after 2 seconds because we have this set timeout here. And since movie OK was initialized to true, it resolves with a string. This string is passed to the callback function here, and that's why we can print that out. Right? So that is the basic structure of how you can one way to consume a promise. There are many different ways, well, a few other ways, but this is one typical approach. Use the .then. Okay, so let's populate the name here into the movie name field, right? So instead of console logging it, I would use query selector, DOM manipulation, and I will select the name. I think I used name. Yeah, so ID is name. So I will select the name field. Let me show that again. So what I'm trying to do is to select this element that has the name ID, and then I'm going to set the inner text to the result, which is the movie name. Okay, so inner text, and I assign the returned name to this inner text. So I would expect the name should show up in here. And let's try that out. So one populates one. Yeah, so after 2 seconds, we see the name show up in this field, right? So this is like an API call. So in the real world, the getMovie function may make a call to some API, right? That may take a few seconds or maybe 1 second to return. And then we use promise to handle that. And then when the promise resolves, meaning the API calls returns a good response, we will show the results on the screen, right? So this is serial execution. So what I can do if I want to make them serial is that in here, in this callback function, I can call the get details, but I have to make sure I return it. So this is important. This is one thing that I struggled for some time when I was learning promises. I never understand why I have to return. The reason I have to return this is so that the promise returned by this get details function would be returned as the overall return value of this call. And that way, we can chain them. We can now use .10 again in here. And that is the beauty of the promises. Because this may not look very good, but if I put that down here, if I put that down here, you will see that it becomes more readable, right? It becomes serial. So getMovie returns a promise. Since it is a promise, I can execute it .then. And this one I return something that will return a promise. And that return promise would be when it resolves, the value would go to the next .then. So this becomes the details. And remember, this is an object, right? Let's confirm it is working. The console of it. So what I would expect is that when I call this populate one, it will call this function. After 2 seconds, I will see the name show up in here. And after another 2 seconds, I will see the console would print the details as an object. So let's try that. Execute this. Populate one. So first take a look at it. Okay, so it shows the name. And then after 2 seconds, it also shows the details. So I'll run that once more because it is pretty quick. So first pay attention to here, and then we look at the console, right? Execute the script and populate one. Okay, first of all, it will show the name, and then after a while, it prints the details down here. So as we can see, it is serial execution. The details will be, we try to get the details only after the name is obtained, right? Okay, so here we can do similar to what we did before, and directed by and screen grade by. Oops. Directed by. So as this is a an object, right? I can reference the directed by property of this object using the dot notation. If you still remember what we talked about in objects, so details is an object, right? So details dot directed by. So we are retrieving the directed by field from this object and assign that to the inner text of this span element. And similarly, we do screenplay by, right? Okay, so let's refresh and run it. So we will expect to see the name, and then after a while, we see the two other fields. As this is a serial execution. So let's see if that works. Name, and then the other fields, right? So the whole point of this example is to show how we can chain promises. This is called a promise chain. And if we use a promise chain, we make sure we wait for the previous step before the next step is executed. So this is serial. This one, after this is done, we go to this one. We may not always want to do it this way. Sometimes we do, but sometimes we do not want to. But I just want to show that this is how we can code the program if we want a serial execution. And right. So any question at this point before we move on? This is quite complicated. So I want to go slowly. If there are any questions, I can help. Let me know. Right. So yeah, so this is one flavor of how we can consume promises, right? Using the .then function, we can chain them to have a serial execution. Another approach, if we still want to do it in a serial manner, but remember we talked about the await, right? So await is basically the same as this one. It's a different syntax, but the conceptually is the same as this one. But let me show you real quick. Serial execution. Okay, so let's make a function. Populate to. Okay, so here we can call get movie, right? Instead of using the .then, we can use the await keyword. This will wait for the promise to resolve, and then it will return the resolved result as the return value, right? So we can store that value into name, right? So, but remember, when we use await, the function has to be asynchronous. So we have to use the async. We have to change this function into an async function by adding this async keyword here. So once we have this async keyword and we use await, the name would be stored in this variable. And let's try it. Let's make sure it works. Okay, so refresh and run this script. And this time I will call populate2. So nothing will happen on the actual screen here because I'm calling populate2, which will only call the getMovie function and print out the name in the console. Right? Okay, so it prints out the name on the console. So this syntax here is very similar to this one. Under the cover, it just basically does the same thing. It will use, I don't know how it was implemented under the cover, but in terms of the behavior, it will be the same. It waits for the get movie to, it waits for the promise to resolve, and then it will grab the resolved value. In this case, since we use await, the resolved value will be returned, and we store it in name and the console log the value, right? So this is another approach. So we can use the dot then to get the resolved value, or we can use the async, await, but we have to turn the function into async function in order to be able to use the await. Okay, so here we can, to complete the implementation, we set the name into the inner text of this thing, and then we can copy paste this block for the details, right? So get details. Details. Actually, I can just copy paste this one, this thing here. Oops. All right. Okay, so it will wait for the movie to resolve, and then it will set the inner text, and after that, it will call the get details and populate the other two fields. So in terms of behavior, it should behave the same as the one above, right? Let's try that out. Populate two. Let's see if it shows, okay, the name and then the two fields, right? So as we can see, it's the exact same behavior. It's a serial execution. The reason why await was introduced is to make things even easier, because even with this promise chain, which is a huge improvement from the callback that was mentioned in Udemy, right? So super nested approach. This becomes more flat and linear, right? We can keep chaining many thought then as we can imagine, right? But still, it is a little bit of thinking here. So await is a way to make it even more simple. Right? There is no callback involved, because in here we still need to use one callback. So using await, no callback, very simple serial execution. So I personally prefer using the await approach if I want a serial execution. But the keyword here is that this is a serial execution. You may not always want that want it that way, right? But before we talk about parallel execution, I do want to quickly handle errors. Remember, the two functions can reject the promise, right? So for the first approach, here, serial one, to handle exception, or to handle rejection, right? Rejected promise. We can use a catch block. So you keep chaining the dot fence, and at the end you do a dot catch, right? So the dot catch, similar to the dot then, it will take a callback function as an argument, and it will pass the error. So this error would be the error we throw from the reject call in here, right? So console error. So let's first try to print that out and see if that works. So let's say we want to pretend the details fails. So set that to false. So the movie name will work, but the details will fail, right? So that means the get movie will resolve, and we get the name, we set that to the field here. And then it called the get details, but it will reject, right? When it rejects, it will not go to here, but instead it will go right to the catch block, and it will print out the error. And since we use an error object, it is okay. Let's print the error, and I will talk about the error object later on. Okay, so let's refresh it and try that out. So the name, and then we console error the object here, the error object. So this is the error object, right? So one typical way to display the error in a more human readable form is to print out the message. So the error object comes with different fields, and one of them is called message. It contains the text of the actual text. I was hoping it shows up in here, but it doesn't. Okay, let's try that. Hmm. Or maybe I should use console log to see the actual text. Okay, let me try again. I was hoping to see just the text. Oh, I forgot to execute. So let's see. So this is a bit unexpected. I would expect to see. It looks like this is not returned from this line. You know, set a breakpoint. I can use a breakpoint to debug, right? So if I refresh and run again. Oh, I know why. I was calling populate 2, but I changed populate 1. I think that's the reason. But let's still use the debugger to execute. Okay, so get movie will resolve because we set the movie OK to true. So it populates, right? It populates the field in here. And then it will call get details and return the promise to the next block in the chain. But we would not expect this line to be executed because the get details will reject the request. So when we hit run, it should go to the catch block after the delay. Yeah, so it goes to the catch block because the promise was rejected. And this is what I want to show you. So this error, yeah, so this error is an object and it has a message and a stack. So message is like a title, like a summary of the error, right? And this is the thing that we put in here when we reject when we reject the promise. And this is a stack. A stack is more like it will tell you in real world application, this can be really long. It will tell you the whole call stack basically. So it is a useful way to debug things, but not so useful for human. Like if you have to print this error on the screen, usually we won't use the stack. This is more for developer to debug, right? We usually use the message to populate the UI. All right, so and in this example, I would console log the error dot message. So it prints out in here, right? We can also print this error on the screen, right, to make it more interesting. I think I have, yeah, so I have another div here with ID message. So we can, instead of printing that in here, we can set set that div, right? So message, set the inner text with the error message. Let's give it a try. Execute, and then I have to make sure I run populate 1. Okay. So the name, and then it fails. Right? When it fails, it will populate the failure in here. Right. So we can in the real world we can show this as a pop-up or as a red message somewhere, but you get the idea. Then syntax. we just add a catch. We just chain the whole promise chain. So the last element in this chain will be the catch block. So any of this, if any of this throw an error, it will always go to the last one. The catch block, I mean. Okay, so and for the other approach, for the async await approach, if we are to handle error, we will use the try catch block. So we try this, right? And then we use the catch block here, which is an error, and we can do the same thing as this one. But you see, the one difference here is that it is actually more granular, right? Because I can do a catch block here, and I do another catch block in here, right? And it can handle different things because I put catch here error in the name field instead. And for this one, I can print the error in the other fields. Right. So those prints. Otherwise, if it's the details, it will show the error in the details. So this time, let's actually fail the first one. We fail the movie name. Then what we would expect to see is that it will print error in here. So can someone tell me, do you expect to see error message in these two fields, or what do you expect to see anything in here at all? So here I set movie OK to false. So movie name will fail, details will not fail, right? And I have a serial execution. So can someone tell me what would you expect to see when I execute this populate to? The movie name is going to fail. So anyone? Just want to make sure you're not sleeping. I know this is a bit a bit tough. So what do you expect to see? And I refresh and when I run populate to, so movie OK is false. So movie is going to fail. Details is going to work. So this one will fail, right? But this will work. So what do you expect to see in these three fields? Anyone here? Maybe first of all, let's ask what do we expect to see in the name field, right? If movie is going to fail, what do you expect to see in the movie field?
It will be empty, right?
Sorry, can you say it again?
Empty? Yes, it's going to fail, right?
Yeah.
It will be empty.
This is going to be empty. So the get movie is going to fail, right? Because I set this to false. So it is going to fail by rejecting the promise. It will return a rejected promise, right? And the rejected promise would have a payload of an error object. So if I call this get movie, this will fail, so this line will not be executed at all, right? It will jump right to the catch block. And the error message is going to be populated in the name field. So let's try one technique that we can use when we are trying to understand code in real life is to run a debugger. That is something I learned over the years. Sometimes when you look at the code and you are not, a little confused, if possible, try to execute that, and it will make things easier to understand. So I set the breakpoint in this line, the catch block, first line in the try. So it will call, and it will wait for the problem. So we so one, right? So the switch and we get the error, and this error, right? The name we set, right? So it failed getting name, right? And the interesting part is that even though this fails, before, if this one fails, it is rejected, it jumped right to the catch block. So we won't be calling get details at all, right? Because the get movie is rejected, so that dot then is not executed. So get details doesn't get a chance to be called at all. So when we do this,
Think. I think Mr. Home is out.
so
Okay. Can you hear Mr. Holman? No? Hello, everybody?
No, I can't.
Yeah, I think his connection is.
Yeah.
I think his connection is not ours.
hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, now you are back. Yeah. Now
I'm
we
back.
can
Oh,
hear
okay,
you.
okay. So I guess I will not.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, sorry. So okay. So where did I lose you? So can you I was explaining this. You could hear that, right?
Now we can hear you. Yeah.
Now you can, right? Okay, perfect. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So this is already complicated enough, and the network problem adds to the challenge. So let's try again. So two different approaches, right? They are very similar, but they have subtle differences. The first one here would have dependencies on each other, right? Basically, if the first one fails, the subsequent ones will not be executed. It will jump right to the catch block. and you won't be able to differentiate between and tell. Well, maybe you can do some trick here to tell which one fails, but it is not as straightforward. But it works. The other approach here, if I use the new await approach, I use the try catch to handle exceptions. And because I use try catch, I can differentiate, right? Because I can have one try catch block for the movie name, another one for the details, and each of them can do different things, right? And the other difference is that if the first one fails, it will still continue to try to execute this. So they are not, I mean, the subsequent ones are not blocked by the first one. So those are the main differences between the two approaches. Sometimes you do it this way, but it is good to learn both. Okay, so let's talk about parallel execution. I promise this is the last thing for today. Okay, so one way to do that is to actually okay, let's make a function relay 3. Right, so we can use the dot then approach this time maybe. And this will return I have to pass a callback. The name will be resolved here. Right, and I can show the name in the name field. So nothing crazy, same as this is just the same as the first approach, right? Get movie dot then. Get movie dot then. Right. But instead of calling the get details in here, right? Sorry, instead of calling the get details in here. So if I do it here, it ensures get details would be called only after get movie is successfully executed. But if I want them to go in parallel, instead of putting get details here, I can put it outside as a sibling, like this, right? Get details. Then it will return the details object, and I can show the details object. I mean the two fields, like this. So this would be parallel, right? Because this one, when it is called, it returns a promise right away. The promise is returned right away. After 2 seconds, the promise is resolved, but the promise itself is returned immediately. That's why it doesn't wait, right? It called this one, and then it returned a promise right away, and then immediately it will call get details, and it return another promise right away. After 2 seconds, both promises are resolved, so the then callback is called, and this is executed, and this is executed. Right, so let's try that out. So we will expect everything to show at the same time. Oh, there is error because movie OK is false. Okay. But you see the error is actually showing up at the same time when the two fields are populated.
Yeah.
Same time. If so both would work, it would make it easier to see. You will see everything is showing at the same time. Okay, so refresh, execute the script to register set of functions, and then I call populate 3 for parallel execution. So once I hit enter, notice the fields, they should all show up at the same time. Right, so this is parallel execution. So just a quick recap, right? With the dot then syntax, we can chain them. if we want serial execution. And when we change them, we have to make sure we return. When we call the second function here, it has to return. Without this return, it won't change, right? Parallel execution, you just do the same thing multiple times in here, right? And each of them can have its own catch, right? I'm not going to repeat that, but you get the point, right? So when you have dot then, you can have the catch block. Right? So like this, right? And then you can do the error handling here. And similar for this one, right? So this is the first, the same syntax as the first example here. That this is serial and this is parallel. Okay, I guess I should probably stop confusing you more. But I guess don't feel discouraged if you do not understand everything 100%. To be honest, if I were you, I don't think I can understand everything 100% the first time I see this. It is, to me, it is quite challenging. But I would encourage you to, you can review the Udemy material, or you can rewatch this lesson again. Go through the example, play with the example, and then you will get it. You have to actually experiment that yourself to get a good understanding. So, hey, Yuki, I think I can send you this function. Would it help if I send you this program here?
I think I think it's better for them to type and then rebuild. It's better. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good
No,
point.
no need to send. Yeah, they can type.
That's a good point.
Just,
That's a good point.
Just can I add one thing? Can you
Yes.
change this the set timeout for the first get movie to 3 or 4 seconds? Because sometimes even though you call first, they resolve later, just to show them that the parallel case.
Okay.
Sometimes you can call first, but they will resolve later than. Yeah, just to show that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So if I set this to 6 seconds, right, and the second one 2 seconds. So if I do serial execution, then I just need to wait for 6 seconds before I see this, right? But let's try that, right? So serial, so populate 1. So I'm going to call populate 1, and we expect to wait 6 seconds before we see the name, and after that we have to wait 2 more seconds to see the other details. I have unfinished code here.
Yeah, the catchball. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, then we'll try again. Okay, it's happy now. Okay, so populate 1. So this is serial, right? And let me hit enter. So wait for 6 seconds before we see the name here. Okay, name, and then 2 more seconds. Show the other ones, right? Things become more interesting when we do the parallel one, because as teacher Yuki mentioned, they are called, so get movie is called first, but it takes 6 seconds to return, right? Since this is parallel, right, we would expect to see, even though this is called first, it will populate later. So let's try that. I have to create the screen first and we run this, and then populate 3. Okay, so let's try that. Right, so this is populated first. 4 more seconds, we see the name here, right? So yeah, this is, that's a good point. That is another way to see how they are running in parallel, even though we call one after another, right? It doesn't we call this it create a promise, and then it go to the next line right away. It doesn't wait, right? But the timeout, this is resolved and it is executed and it runs. Yeah, I think Udemy mentioned. I don't know the details of that. I just know how to use it. But apparently, JavaScript will hand off the execution of this set timer to the web API, and web API will notify JavaScript to execute something when the timer is done. Yeah, so that is async.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things to digest.
We can
study.
a lot of things to digest. Yeah. Today I'm just showing two main categories of asynchronous execution. In the real world, we often have a mix of both, right? Sometimes you may have information that you can go fetch at the same time. Don't wait for each other. But sometimes there are information that are dependent on some other information. So you can have a bunch of promises running in parallel. After they are all resolved, then maybe after that you call something else and let it become a sequential, a mix of parallel and sequential. But those are the main way that you can use promises. So go through this again. Try to create this example. You don't need to follow exactly this one, but you can create whatever you want. But do try both the .then approach as well as the async await approach. Try serial and parallel. Experiment with that. Okay, so anything else, Yuki?
No, I think I think the main point is for them to try again and again and again. Yeah. Make sure that you can
it takes quite a bit
understand
of
the concept. Yeah.
So just practice more and you will get it. This one is more tricky, and I think this is the trickiest thing. I personally think is the most tricky thing in JavaScript. But with practice, you will understand that. And it is very important to understand because in the real world, you will always see this everywhere.
You use a lot. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I will stop recording now.
Okay,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay, so